Welcome back to Gardening by the Bone. Thank you once again to the garden crew for tuning in to another video. And to those of you that just tuning in for your first time and you want to know how you can be a part of the garden crew, all you got to do is click that subscribe button. Click on the like, click on the share, and click on that bell so you'll be notified every time I put up a new video. And drop me a comment, talk to me, garden crew. Well, today, garden crew, we're planting out the Honey Select sweet corn. This is a variety I started last year and I planted corn for the first time. I started out to plant, but I said I'm going to give it another shot. So y'all stay tuned, garden crew. We got action. So garden crew, you see me right here. I'm just doing a little layout with my bamboo stick. I'm gonna do 2 squares, one on that side where I'm standing at and one on the other side. And I'm gonna leave a little space in the middle. I plan on putting some cucumbers in the middle. So we gonna see how this worked. Last year I didn't really get a good corn harvest, but hopefully this year we'll do a little better. Okay, garden crew, right here. I'm trying to figure out which corn I want to plant. I want to plant both of them, but they suggest that you don't plant two different varieties of corn because it's not going to turn out too good. So I got to make a choice. So I'm going to show you how I made my choice. Y'all know, maybe some of y'all know, maybe some of y'all don't know. But in the Bible, they had the disciples, they had to choose another disciple because Judas, he committed suicide. So they had to decide who to choose between two people. So what they did, they prayed to the Lord, and they did what they call casting lots. And the Lord, being in control of everything, he can cause the lot to fall in whichever person's favor, whom he would choose. So I'm gonna do something like that too. You see me right here, what I'm gonna do is, I said I'm gonna throw one of the corn, and whichever one land in the hole, that's the one I'm gonna plant. That first one I threw, it went all the way out the bed. So I'm gonna throw the next one. The next one I'm gonna throw, it landed inside the bed. So it was closer to the hole than the other one. So you guessed it, I'm gonna plant that one. Well, there you have it, Garden Crew. We got the Honey Select sweet corn planted out. And as you can see, it's 14 days later, and you can see that most of it germinated. I'll keep y'all posted. So thank y'all for watching, and we'll see you on the next video. And remember to click on that like, comment, subscribe, and drop me a comment. Talk to me, Garden Crew. This is God by the Bone.